Hey now everybody, Jamie here, and today I'm going to kick off a video series all about my favorite series of all time, Star Trek. I'm a huge science fiction fan of all kinds, but I always go back to Star Trek as my favorite. Now there's tons of games based in the Star Trek intellectual property, and I'd like to explore as many of them as possible, tell you whether they're great, if they're bad, if they're good for Star Trek fans, if they're good for not Star Trek fans. So let's get this thing rolling, and this first one is probably going to be the smallest one of the lot. So let's do it. Star Trek, Chrono Trek. So I mentioned that this first game is probably the smallest game, and absolutely, yes, it is a tiny little box. But let me tell you that this tiny little box has more Star Trek theme in it than probably every other game that I'm going to talk about in this video series. There is a ton of stuff in this box. The series that are being pulled from for this game are the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, the animated series, and all of the movies as well. So there's a ton of Star Trek lore to pull from this game. Now this is Chrono Trek, so it's going to be about time travel.
We're going to attempt time travel. We are computing our trajectory at this time.
The concept of the game is that when you set up the game, there's a ton of cards out on the table, and each one of those cards represents something that happened in time. So it's a giant Star Trek timeline, the beginning of time all the way to the future that is represented in the final episode of Next Generation, the future episode with the anomaly that's getting bigger as it goes backwards in time. Weird. But anyway, all of the stuff that happened in Star Trek is in this timeline. And each player takes a character, and that character has a series of goals that it must meet to win the game. And a lot of times those goals are changing events throughout history. You want to have a specific set of events that have happened throughout history for you to win. Some of them already happened, and some of them haven't happened, and you have to make them happen. So essentially, on your turn, you're going to draw a card, put it in your hand, and you're going to play a card. That's the only mechanics of this game, really. But essentially, what you want to have happen is changing those time events. So when you play that, you have a time event happen, you're going to flip some event that happened in time, and it's going to change. And that is going to have a ripple effect on a bunch of events that happen in the future. It'll tell you which cards in the future you now need to change. Now, as you can see, if you're trying to make a series of events happen throughout history and everybody's goals are different, you changing one thing and having that ripple effect is going to affect everybody else's goals. Now they have to change those things back so that they can meet their goals. So there's this push and pull in the game. Now, I will say this game is extremely simplistic. It's not that dissimilar to Flux. It was designed by Looney Labs. They designed Flux. It's got a Flux vibe. But the thematics of it are far superior to that. This one actually feels like you're doing something to meet these goals, but it is an extremely chaotic game. This is random as hell, chaotic as hell, and you're just going to have to go with that. That's really the concept of this game. It's not really a heavy strategy game in any stretch of the imagination. This is all about just the fun of playing cards. It's a very beer and pretzels type game. Now, I will say that I like this game. It's not a fantastic game, and you definitely should never play this game with two players. It's terrible. I played it that way. It was awful. I lost in 2 rounds because it's just at that point randomness. But when you have like 3 and 4 players playing, there's a lot of time events happening and things are changing around. And when your turn comes up, the whole timeline has been completely destroyed, and you have to try to fix it. It becomes very fun to do that. I actually like this game very much. And for a Star Trek fan, this is absolutely fantastic, 100% perfect, spot on, awesome, because every card is an Easter egg from some episode somewhere. And every card that's played, you get to talk about how cool that thing was from Star Trek, if you're a Star Trek fan. This is almost like a souvenir of Star Trek all in this one box, because there's just so many things in there from Star Trek. If you're not a Star Trek fan, I'm not sure that it's really a great fit, because you really kind of have to know the Star Trek lore to understand any of the cards or to even care about any of those cards. So it's not a great game for Star Trek fans. Great game for Star Trek fans. If you're looking for a good game, it's not that fantastic, but it's a fun beer and pretzels game. So essentially, Star Trek Chrono Trek, tiny little box, jam-packed full of Star Trek awesomeness. I like it. I'm happy to have it as a Star Trek fan.
Star Trek 5-Year Mission.
Okay, so this one is a little bit more complex than Star Trek Chrono Trek, but not by a significant amount, really. This is a dice game. The theme is either Star Trek the original series or Star Trek the Next Generation. They have a deck of cards for either. They have all the characters from both, and they even have the main board you can flip over to make it the different Enterprise, whatever. So you can play as either crew that you want. The game really doesn't change at all, other than the pictures and the special abilities that your characters have. What you're doing in this game is you're drawing a bunch of cards from 3 different colored decks that are 3 different difficulties, and each one of those cards is going to have a recipe of die faces and colors that you need to assign to those cards to satisfy that problem, right? So it might have a yellow 3, a red 2, and a blue of 5 or less. You have to put on there to satisfy it and complete that card. And each round you're drawing new cards and putting them out, so there's a constant flood of problems that you have to satisfy. And you do this by rolling dice and assigning dice to those cards. This game's boring.
Pain! Pain!
As far as thematics for Star Trek, it's Star Trek in pictures only. There's no theme to the game. It's just a dice game with pictures on it. And that's, so a Star Trek fan, who cares? You don't even need this game. I mean, look at the cover of the box. It's just ridiculous. It's so stupid. That's a picture from, I think, the episode Space Seed, the one with Khan in it. And it has that press shot of the cast of Next Generation. They all posed together for the view screen. It looks ridiculous. But essentially, it's just a bunch of Star Trek pictures. I guess the problem with this game is that when your turn comes up, you roll a bunch of dice. And it could be, you look at all the cards and you might not have anything to do. So you're like, okay, well, I'm not doing anything. And you just pass your turn because you didn't roll any of the numbers. There's nothing but roll a bunch of dice and see what happens. This game is just playing by itself, essentially. There's one interesting choice in the game, and it's that when it comes around to you, you need to have a pool of dice of a certain number in your hand. And when you place dice out, they stay out, and other players can add dice and things. But if it comes back around to you and you didn't get your dice back, you have to get more dice. So whenever a card is completed, those dice go on to the Enterprise. And you get to take whichever dice off of there you want. So you get to sort of build your dice pool of the colors that you think will work best for your turn. That's the only choice that you have in this game that really means anything, and it barely means anything anyway. So like I said, no Star Trek theme on this other than pictures. So Star Trek fan, who even cares? As far as a dice game goes, there's about 650,000 better dice games out there. So don't even bother with this one if that's what you're looking for. And God forbid if you're not a Star Trek fan, because there's nothing here to enjoy.
Give me a bellyache, and I got a beauty right now.
Star Trek Ascendancy.
All right, Star Trek Ascendancy. This is probably going to be the biggest one of the entire series, the biggest game, and I'm probably kind of blowing my wad having this one in the first part of this series, but whatever, it's awesome. Basically, this is a 4X Star Trek game. 4X is explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate.
You sure about that?
Oh, quite sure.
Giant game, civilization game. You're building a Star Trek civilization. The base game comes with 3 factions, the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Federation. And you start off on your home world and you expand outwards. You go to warp and you fly to the next planet. You discover that planet. It could be pre-warp. It could be a warp civilization. It could be a hostile nebula or something that your ships will blow up if you go in, but you could also try to brave that nebula and study it. When you get to a planet, you draw cards cards that are event cards, things that happen there. They're basically little Star Trek episodes that happen on those planets. Then you colonize that planet and start building resource production nodes and culture nodes and research facilities. And you use that research to develop technologies that give you better shields and better guns and phasers and, cloaking devices and better exploration devices and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then you go to war with the other civilizations.
How long shall we stare at each other across the neutral zone?
Wow, this game is gigantic, and it's got so much in it. So if you're a fan of complex games with that, you'll sit there for 3 and 4 and 5 hours playing and building up your civilization and going to war with the other factions. This is a fantastic game for that. And this one just bleeds Star Trek theme. Every faction in the box, every faction in the expansions, what they got, the Ferengi, the Cardassians, the Andorians, the Vulcans, they just feel so much like Star Trek, and exactly the way that those races are portrayed in the show, you feel that in the game as well. Every expansion gives you more planets and more event cards that you can implement into your game to get more diversity of what happens in the game. Man, this game is just great. Now, it isn't without its flaws. I don't think that I care as much for the victory conditions. Essentially, you win by getting 5 ascendancy tokens, which you spend culture to get. And each faction gets culture in a different way. Like the Klingons get culture from attacking people, and the Romulans get culture from doing scientific breakthroughs and exploration for the Federation, and the Ferengi for doing trade type things. So anyway, everybody has their different way of gaining culture, and you spend culture to get these ascendancy tokens. When you get to 5, you win the game. I don't really dig that, because it's one of those things. I always have a problem with civilization games where somebody who's just narrow focusing that one thing, they'll win quickly. And if you don't narrow focus, you'll lose the game, and that sucks. And it doesn't leave room for exploring the entire adventure of the game and just exploring for the fun of exploring. You have to just try to win. Anyway, that aside, the game is absolutely wonderful. I think there is a bit of randomness in the game that is a problem. Sometimes you'll just have a poor luck of the draw when it comes to planets, and you won't get the planets that have the resources you need. Sometimes you'll just get hit with a series of nebulas that do nothing for you while everybody else is getting these great resource-rich planets. So there are some problems with the game that can be fixed with a few easy and not game-breaking house rules. But overall, this is a fantastic game. Star Trek fans will revel in this experience. This is probably one of the best ones for a Star Trek fan. Non-Star Trek fans will still have fun because it's a solid 4X game. And if you like Twilight Imperium and you like Eclipse and those types of games, this is in that ballpark. This is a good one too. You just got different science fiction races to play. It is very complex though, and it is very big. And if you want to get the full experience, you need some of those expansions to get some of those other races. And there's only 3 races in the main box. So it's only a 3-player game. You really need 4 players to make this game fun. And you probably don't want to go over that. You can go to 5, 6, and 7 if you want to, but I wouldn't do that. So this one is highly recommended by me. I love this game to death. As a Star Trek fan, it's my favorite one of the lot. So check out Star Trek Ascendancy. All right, gang. Well, that is my first 3 Star Trek games. I hope you enjoyed it. And please come on back for part 2. We're going to talk about 3 more, and then we're going to keep doing it until I run out of Star Trek games. So until next time, have a good one, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video, please do us a giant favor by subscribing to the channel and clicking that wacky bell icon. If you're into board games, miniatures games, role-playing games, we have a bunch of audio podcasts you might enjoy. You can find those at thesecretcabal.com or on iTunes and Stitcher.